Now, I remember for many decades that a principle of climate change mitigation was stop deforestation. That held for a long, long time, right? And of course, that comes back to just the CO2, cumulative CO2 buildup. Thanks for mentioning the forest canopy, Regina. The World Resources Act Institute does put out a cumulative loss of forest canopy, which is very, very useful.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and I'll be your host as we discuss our shrinking canopies. Well, what is a forest canopy? We're not talking about a canopy bed, of course. What is a canopy and why do we care? The canopies, if you imagine a stalk of broccoli, you have the stalk, of course, and then you have all the outgrowth. That's the part that we like to eat. Well, that is what we're referring to sort of loosely when we talk about the canopy of the forest. It's like the upper region where all the action occurs. I don't want to say all the action, but let's just say a lot of the exciting action. And these are incredibly important for biodiversity. There are many animals that live within the forest canopies. The canopies themselves provide protection to some of the other living beings that are underneath the canopies. They also have their own ecosystem. They're an extremely rich, biodiverse aspect of our planet. And as you can tell by our title, they are shrinking. Of course, we know about deforestation, but so often people don't talk specifically about the canopies and what that means because of deforestation. One of our producers who's going to be joining us today, Charles, was very inspired by Hannah Richie's most recent book, Not the End of the World, which covers so many incredible topics, and this one included. And because we see this so rarely mentioned, we thought that it was time that someone do mention it. That's what we're going to do on this show. And by the way, we really try to come up with topics that other channels are not discussing, and this is one of them. So if you have any additions that you have not seen covered, any topics, please put those in the comments. We like to be as creative and as original as possible when it comes to discussing the climate crisis. And I'm going to just turn it right over without much ado to Charles. Charles, please share your thoughts with us.
This book was published this year and explores Hannah's optimistic perspective on solving environmental challenges and building a sustainable future. The book emphasizes urgent optimism and provides data-driven insights into various environmental issues, including air pollution, climate change, deforestation, food, biodiversity loss, ocean plastics, and overfishing. And so we picked one of those topics today, deforestation. So Hannah Richie is a leading voice in the field of environmental science, known for her data-driven approach to sustainability and her efforts to inspire hope and action in the face of climate change. I want to suggest to our panel that today's discussion will be the first of a few topics that, although we've covered in past videos, we'll review again as guided from the perspective of Hannah's data-driven approach and her book. There are a few opening, more general statements I want to summarize from her book before we get into the details of deforestation. The first is the whole idea of sustainability. So the UN defines sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That definition has two halves. The first half is making sure that everyone in the world today, the present generation, can live a good and healthy life. The second half is making sure that we live in a way that doesn't degrade the environment for future generations. In other words, we shouldn't create environmental damage that takes the opportunity of a good and healthy life away from future generations. So according to this definition, the world has never been sustainable because we've never achieved both halves at the same time. Hannah's book states that no previous generation had the knowledge, technology, political systems, or international cooperation to do both halves at the same time. But it then proposes that we have the opportunity to be the first generation that achieves this sustainability, and it challenges us to take it. Just as Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So with that inspiring backdrop, I'll say a few things about deforestation. So as noted, that forest loss encompasses both deforestation and forest degradation. It's important to point out the difference between these two things, i.e. deforestation and forest degradation. Deforestation is the permanent conversion of forests to other land uses such as agriculture, whereas degradation is the temporary thinning of forests which later regrow. An example might be a forest fire. The environmental impacts of deforestation are more severe and permanent than forest degradation. So the book asks the question, is the disappearance of the Amazon a threat to the world's oxygen supply? And the book clarifies the amount of oxygen that the Amazon consumes is almost exactly the same as the amount it produces. These cancel each other out, so it provides almost none of the oxygen in the atmosphere. The oxygen in our atmosphere came from phytoplankton in the oceans millions of years ago. The Earth had its great oxidation event where cyanobacteria, the first organisms to photosynthesize, started to convert CO2 to O2. That's where most of our oxygen comes from, and it's very hard to significantly change this balance. The main motivation to act to prevent or minimize the amount of deforestation are to preserve biodiversity, and this is especially true in the tropical forests, which have a tremendous amount of biodiversity. And of course, to keep the carbon in these forests from being released. So when we cut down these trees, the carbon is released, and in some cases, this carbon has been locked up for hundreds of thousands of years in these forests. The headlines that suggest that Amazon deforestation is at an historic high is not strictly true, because Amazonian deforestation rates peaked in the late 90s and have fallen since. Over the last 20 years, the Amazon rainforest has lost approximately 300,000 square kilometers, that's 30 million hectares, due to deforestations. The rates have fluctuated with significant peaks in the early 2000s and recent increases, although there have been periods of decline due to effective policies and international cooperation. So the primary drivers of deforestation include cattle ranching, agriculture, logging, and infrastructure development.
Thanks so much, Charles, for that opening. And I really appreciate your outlining the various topics that Hannah's covered in her most recent book. The whole thing that you described about the interplay of oxygen was really interesting. And actually, it's also kind of scary. If we slowly deplete ourselves of the much needed oxygen, well, what's going to happen to us? Peter, what do you think?
Oxygen is very, very slowly declining. That's one of the work that the son of Charles Keeling, who's at Scripps, has done. So you can go to Scripps and you can see that there's a a very slight, steady decline in world oxygen. Supposedly, it's nothing like enough that's going to affect us, but yeah, it's pretty sobering when you look at it. I want to talk about Hannah Ritchie's, what is most important to me about Hannah Ritchie, and that is the stellar work that she has been doing for some years with Our World in Data. I use it a lot. There's no source that comes close to how excellent and very well presented that data is. I just cannot praise her and that work too much. It's amazing. So she has data and she puts it out so that pretty well most people will be able to understand it quite readily. That's quite an achievement on climate change data, right? And then she does a little essay with every issue, every topic. And the essays are very, very good indeed. I don't get a tremendously positive outlook on our situation from her essays. So there we go. I just want to say quickly that the interpretation of what the state of the world is like, it depends very much on your psychology, right? I can remember our world how it used to be, and that's over. Okay, so it's heartbreaking for me that my world has ended. My world of nature has been ended, and the data, of course, completely confirm that. Things are not very good. The best source, and it is another amazing source of forestry and deforestation, is from Maryland University, and it's called GLAM, and it's a satellite project, and it is a brilliant satellite project. It's absolutely amazing. They have a map, and they have different colored little tiny blocks on the satellites, and you can find where the logging is being done last year, the year before, the year before. It's an incredible source, and they do great work. And their work is republished by the World Resources Institute in their forestry section. So-called GLAM is Global Land Analysis and Discovery. Their report was very recently published, and we are still losing 10 football, that is soccer fields of tropical forest every minute. That's not changed as long as I can remember. It's sort of gone up and it's going to go down, but it's no better off. In the report, which was put out by the, as I say, by the World Resources Institute, if you go back 10 years on the rate of deforestation, we're no better off at all. We're doing it at the same rate. It's actually slightly higher than 10 years ago. So why is it, you both mentioned very well why it's so important, and it's so important because of what we call biodiversity, which to me is the natural world, wonderful natural life, which I was brought up in as a child in England countryside, so I'll always sort of be in love with that kind of world. And then the other thing really is how you look at the future, how you interpret the future. I try and interpret the future as regards, the rights of children, the rights of children to have a decent life around the world. I feel very strongly about that because our present economy is depriving them of what the IPCC calls a livable future. I don't see any question in that at all. So biodiversity, as we call it, which is nature, and deforestation, which is a very nice term for wrecking and ruining forests, that very much, of course, comes from what we call forestry nowadays. The big problem as regards the state of the planet and the climate is that they both have what's called a negative synergy. The more you deforest, the worse it becomes for biodiversity, and that means ecosystem function. That's really what we mean there. And the more intentionally you damage and degrade ecosystems, the worse it becomes for the climate and CO2. So just to hone down to the CO2 situation, you'll find all kinds of numbers on the amount of deforestation and the amount of CO2 that's emitted. So it's pretty confusing. About 10% of our emissions, I think, is probably accurate, which is a huge amount, right? People have said 20%. So 10% of our emissions is absolutely massive. Now, I remember for many decades that a principle of climate change mitigation was stop deforestation. That held for a long, long time, right? And of course, that comes back to just the CO2, cumulative CO2 buildup. Thanks for mentioning the forest canopy, Regina. The World Resources Act Institute does put out a cumulative loss of forest canopy, which is very, very useful. And we should not be looking at deforestation every year and comparing year by year. That's not really the point at all. We should be looking at cumulative deforestation and how much forest we've lost over quite a long period of time. And as I say, that's carrying on at the same rate. And in my view, the science is absolutely definite. You cannot continue emitting CO2. Atmospheric CO2 is now over 50% higher than it was from pre-industrial. And it is going up in the atmosphere faster than it ever has before. That is 5 times faster than it has in at least the past 56 million years. That's from the IPCC. Somehow we've got to get a better hold of this situation, and we have to stop CO2 going up. And that should be our entire focus, right? CO2 is our focus, right? We should be interpreting deforestation in terms of CO2, in my view. I love the forests. I'm lucky in Canada, we still have old growth forests. It's an amazing experience to walk through an old growth forest. It's absolutely astounding. I'm not alone there. Everybody agrees with me. Thank you, forests.
Thank you, Peter. I really love forests too. And the thing that's so interesting each time we do this show is we have a topic and we're disciplined about the topic, but there are so many things that come out from that topic. And part of it, and I don't want to get us off course here, but loving the forest is not just important, but it's important for our humanity, because being in nature is a healing force. It helps us feel connected to the earth, to the planet, to other living beings. And when we are day after day living in cities with our phones in front of our face, like the horse that's got the feed bag right over the snout there, it's the only thing that exists is pixels. We're existing from the neck up, and it's creating a great deal of emptiness, of sadness, this lack of meaning in people's lives. And this is a negative feedback loop where people, rather than going to the source, which is nature, are continually going to technology for understanding or satisfaction. And this is further divorcing us from our humanity and from nature. So it is so important for us to emphasize the forests, the life in the forest, and how much we can heal and connect when we are in nature. And Paul, I want to hear what you have to say about deforestation and the tragedy that it is.
Thank you, everybody. It is a very important topic. I'll talk about an individual tree first. In the city, you can walk along the street and just see an individual tree, maybe a little patch of grass around it if you're lucky. And if you happen to have a thermal device that can attach to your smartphone to measure temperatures, so you're looking in the infrared basically, and you can look around the tree and you can see that it's the coolest part of the entire neighborhood. That single tree and the grass around it, the shade it's providing, creating a little microclimate. You might even get a mosquito bite in the summer, if you're in that shaded part under the tree, which is the downside of it, but it's the closest you can get to nature inside the city. And then, go to a park where you have groves of trees and it's much cooler, it's much quieter. Trees muffle the sound of people going about their busy lives. I have a little portable CO2 monitor, which I put on a string. I wear it around my neck sometimes when I go out, and I can see the lowest readings in the entire city when I'm just standing or walking amongst those trees. CO2 levels are lowest, and presumably oxygen levels will be highest, just from a few trees. I mean, it changes the system. And now we can talk about entire forests. We can go to very, very dense forests, whether they be, rainforests in the tropics or rainforests in northern British Columbia. And it's a different world amongst those forests. And, it was mentioned about oxygen levels. The oxygen concentration is about 21% on the planet now. That's varied between about 15% and 30%. When it's low, on the low side, forest fires Wildfires don't burn as fiercely, so you get less burning, and it allows the tree growth to increase. When you have 30% levels of oxygen in the air, then the slightest spark from lightning or whatever, and you can get massive, very strong, intense fires. So it's kind of a, forests are part of the sort of buffering or compensation mechanism in which the earth keeps gases at stable levels. CO2 levels, of course, are rising rapidly, as Peter's pointed out. The CO2 level goes up 3 parts per million in 1 year, then the oxygen level declines double that. 2 oxygens in the CO2 molecule is declining about 6 ppm per year. But because we're at the high 20% level, it's a very small fraction of what there is, but it's important. So, if I drive from Ottawa to Toronto to visit family, I pass an area that was hit by a derecho 2 years ago. So this derecho straight line winds knocked over entire swaths of forest next to the highway. You can drive up some of the small country roads and you can see just the total devastation, every tree knocked over. I do this every year, every so often on my trip. I drive on this road to see how the forests are recovering. So given time, they recover. The wood rots, of course, gets waterlogged, rots, increases the fertility of the soils, new shoots come up, and the forests, they can recover over time, but it takes a long period of time for that to happen. So our global forests are being stressed by a lot of different factors, including climate change. So one of the big concerns with, as the temperatures are warming, as the rainfall and precipitation patterns change, what was conducive to forest growth in some regions that are being stressed by more and more droughts and less rainfall is that these forests are kind of no longer in an optimal environment. So if there's a spark from lightning, and we're getting more lightning occurring around the world in our warming, more unstable atmosphere. But if there's a wildfire and the forest burns down, we can assume that a new forest will regrow in that region if the precipitation patterns and temperatures have changed. So there's stress to forests. Of course, Canada had tremendous, record-setting wildfires in 2023, and this year is starting off to be a very active wildfire year. So we need to change our thinking in the way that we deal with these sort of things. In Canada, our population densities are fairly low. So if there's wildfires breaking out, we tend to just let them burn and burn and burn until they burn themselves out, usually by the fall. But if they're starting in, March, April, earlier than normal, they can cause tremendous forest loss over the summer. So we need to rethink how we deal with such things. We've also had cases of mountain pine beetle killing loads of forests in western provinces of Canada. We've had emerald ash borer, and these other things are becoming more prevalent as the temperature warms. Forests are under a lot of stress, but they are vital for the functioning of our planet's ecosystems.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for bringing up derecho. I mean, that's a term that we don't hear enough of. And for those of you who are watching, can you just give us a brief rundown of a derecho, Paul?
Derecho, most people would have had no idea, like even 5 years ago, what this phenomena is. And it's basically, if you've got a widespread cold front, for example, cold air is dense, dry air advancing on warm air, then the cold, cooler, dense air goes underneath. And because it's dense, it's moving very fast. These cold fronts can move very, very fast, 30, 40, 60 kilometers an hour. They push up the warm, moist air and cause frontal storms, and it can develop into very, very strong straight line winds. So basically derechos they can reach hurricane force winds, but the winds are moving in a straight line. So when they knock over trees, all the trees end up pointing in the same direction. It's not like a tornado swirling, knocking trees that are over in all different directions, or a downburst where the air comes down and the trees all collapse, but they're all pointing towards the center. So they're very, very fast straight line winds, mostly from frontal storms, which we're getting more of them as the energy in the atmosphere increases. As we get warming, more water vapor in the atmosphere, more energy to fuel the larger storms that we're seeing.
Thanks so much for that. And those of you who are watching, if you've been struggling to keep up with your notes, don't worry. We'll put the definition to derecho in the description. We always want to help people be able to engage in these conversations. And of course, climate vocabulary is extremely important. So we'll have that for you. And I want to hand it straight back to Charles. You started us off on this discussion and you had mentioned that there were some other points you wanted to bring up. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear what those are, Charles.
So I just want to sort of bring up some of the key points from the deforestation chapter in Hannah's book. So global deforestation trends. Deforestation rates have varied over time with significant peaks and declines. The 1980s saw the highest rates of deforestation, but efforts to curb forest loss have led to some reductions in recent years. Of course, the drivers of deforestation are primarily agriculture, and it's responsible for clearing large areas of forest for crops and livestock. And I put an emphasis on livestock. And of course, logging, both legal and illegal logging, contributes significantly to forest loss. Infrastructure development, construction of roads, dams, urban expansion also leads to deforestation. And then, of course, mining, extractive industries often clear forests to access mineral resources. So the impact of climate change on deforestation, the heat waves and droughts, these climate events exacerbate forest loss by increasing the frequency and intensity of wildfires. And of course, wildfires, natural and human cause, destroy vast areas of forest annually. And of course, Paul brought up the pests and diseases. Invasive species like the mountain pine beetle and emerald ash borer have devastated large forest areas, particularly in North America. Now, regional variations, tropical regions, the Amazon, Congo Basin, Southeast Asia are hotspots for deforestation due to agricultural expansion and logging. And in the temperate regions, some temperate regions have seen forest regrowth due to conservation efforts and changes in land use. So conservation efforts, establishing protected areas have been effective in reducing deforestation in some regions. Typically, the richer countries are regaining forest, whereas the poorer countries are losing their forests. So promoting sustainable agriculture and logging practices can help mitigate forest loss. And then there's the idea of reforestation and afforestation, and planting new forests and restoring degraded lands are crucial strategies for increasing forest cover. So in terms of policy, ending deforestation requires a multifaceted approach, including improving agricultural productivity. And that's a key one because, where your agriculture is not as productive, you can end up using more land to get the same amount of production. And this is where our modern agriculture comes into play with the use of fertilizers. Also, another big one is reducing meat consumption, because much of the deforestation is driven by creating land for grazing livestock, and also enhancing forest management. And of course, there is the technological advancements we're seeing in terms of the sophisticated satellites that are able to measure and keep track of our levels of deforestation and forest loss. So that's another critical thing I'll mention. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Regina.
Thank you. You mentioned technology. I very often speak. There's a real problem with technology, but there also is a lot of promise with technology. Whenever we come up with something, humanity, we can do something, use it for good or for ill. And And technology can be used for good. We've discussed drones going over various forests and seeing what needs to be done. We've also discussed, seeding from drones and different technological things such as that. So there is a real opportunity there. Yes, so thank you for bringing that up. And I'm going to turn it back over to Peter.
Thanks. So I should touch on the other big important factor in our climate changed world with respect to the world's forests, and that is, of course, the carbon sink. So our forests and oceans have supposedly done us a favor, but not done the future a favor, by taking up a lot of our carbon emissions being mainly from burning fossil fuels, but also from cutting forests down. The last assessment of the IPCC, the sixth assessment, we have always known, science has always known that there was a limit, particularly to the forest carbon sink. They've always known that if we continued emitting CO2 and increasing the temperature, a time would come when the forest carbon sink would go into decline. And then instead of it bringing atmospheric CO2 down, it would kick atmospheric CO2 up even higher. Now, that's been all over the place, but the sixth assessment said very definitely that that was going to happen, and it was going to happen around 2050 at the latest. So that's a massive, huge tipping point. Our forests are still enormous. Our main forest, as regards sinking carbon, is the boreal forest in the north, circumpolar, all around the continent. That is by far the largest forest. The largest part of that forest is the Siberian Russian forest. A big portion of that is called a taiga. And if you look at CO2 going up, as I say, science only comes up with one conclusion. That is, we have to stop cutting and damaging forests. There really is no way around that, okay? However you put it, we've always known that, and it's more obvious today than ever. Now, my wife, Julie, found a scrap of paper the other day, which was a poem that I had written about our forest defenders in coastal Canada, where we are. And they have been protecting a particular rare, pristine forest, old-growth forest on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And the region is called Fairy Creek. So here's my poem for you. There are far too fairies in the woods today. Industries have swept most away. So sad, what can I say? The courageous few who took a stand for the last, grandest, greatest stand. This old man salutes you, and oh, how I thank you. You courageous few who shackled and chained yourself to the welcoming bosom of our Mother Earth, defending the last of the ancient great standing people, the highest form of life at Fairy Creek. You must know, and as you show, how the forest does not belong to us. We belong to the forest. So that's my little poem, and I think I followed up on the carbon sink, except to say the carbon sink efficiency is declining. The Global Carbon Project for the past 4 years have crunched the data on the sinking efficiency of the world's forests, and it's declining, and every year it's declined more. It is absolutely, totally alarming, and that's scientific data of the highest importance.
Thank you for that. And really, really, thank you so much for that poem. I have to say, I found it very moving, and I really appreciate your sharing that with us. And you really encapsulated something that I so strongly believe. They're not our forests. As you said, they don't belong to us, and we do belong to them. And again, I think that's why we see so much discontent in the world today, because of the separation from humanity and nature. Yeah, so really, thank you so much. Paul, I'm looking forward to you closing us out on this topic.
Thank you. And Peter, I think it's very tough act for me to follow. I don't have a poem, and I couldn't begin, I think, to compose one like you did. And yes, thank you very much for that. I think that's going to be the one of the highlights of this program, actually. If you look at the ecology on this planet, I mean, the trees are a vital part of this ecology. We've been talking about land-based plants, trees, forests, but I just want to mention that the marine forests are struggling as well. And, we've talked previously on the kelp forests, which are considered the forests of the seas, and how they've been in great decline as well. So we have to be very careful. As a species, we really do want to preserve ecosystems and preserve, healthy functioning chain of life on this planet. Then we would be ill-advised to continue devastating the forests. And forestry growth, you have to look at sort of the demand for wood. Before the digital revolution, newspapers had tremendous widespread circulation. I remember, local newspapers growing up in Oakville, the Toronto Star, and, every year it seemed to get bigger and bigger and more bulkier and full of advertisements and so on. But at least, we put that behind us with the digital revolution, and that, that was a real huge source of demand for wood and for deforestation. So as Charles mentioned, deforestation has decreased in some wealthy Western countries, and it's actually increased significantly in poorer countries. And we know that that's because it's being, the wood is being burned to cook food for people, to build shelters, because, if you're extremely poor, you don't really have much choice for your cooking fuel and also for your shelter. So part of the solution to slowing down and reversing deforestation is to raise standards of living for people in many third world countries. And then they don't have to resort to these sort of survival techniques of doing what they can and burning, cutting down the local trees and burning the wood to provide heat and fuel for their cooking. There's many different interconnections and levels of things that we can do to reduce deforestation.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very true. So much wood is being used for preparation of food. Madagascar, for example, comes to mind. We just have to do everything that we can, as you said, to elevate the way that people live, the way that people shelter, the way that people feed themselves, and most especially the way that people view Mother Earth. This is what we have to do. No one can look at a forest or the canopy of a forest and see the abundant life that it holds and think, well, that's worth sacrificing. I just don't see how that's possible. And I hope everyone watching, I really, really hope you agree. If you really love the planet as much as we all do, and I know you do because you're here, please share this video, like and subscribe. And please know we are always so grateful each and every time you tune in. Thank you so much. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at the Climate Emergency Forum.